Welcome into episode 440 of the Skate Podcast. I am Brian DeFelice, joined by Scott McLaughlin. Bridget is away in Florida this week, so she will be back as soon as possible. She's enjoying the sunshine down there, Scott.
I
And
thought she was on a scouting trip.
yeah, I think she might be. There's a third line forward down in Florida that he's an older guy, but he's performing real well in the postseason, pending UFA. Maybe she's scouting him. Who knows?
Yeah, I think she's going to Harry Potter world as well. So maybe there's like a Quidditch star. Could be a two-sport athlete.
Yeah, there you go.
Bruins have to try to get creative. So
yeah. So Scott, before we get into our mailbag today, which is what this episode is going to primarily be, I wanted to get into a quick debate with you because there's a question out there about what's the toughest season? What's the most grueling season out there? Is it the NFL? Is it the NHL? Right? Is it basketball? Is it baseball? It's none of those. It's flu season. And it's allergy season because that is an absolute killer right now with me. I mean, I'm seeing people get the flu, but personally, I'm getting allergies left and right. In my eyes, you can't tell right now, but they are watery and they're heavy, and my head is foggy as a October ominous evening. I don't really know what to say, but it's tough.
I'm knocking on my wood table right now because I haven't been hit yet. I have been outside quite a bit, so I'm honestly kind of surprised. Usually it does come for me at some point in the spring, though.
Yeah, it's a change of seasons. It's tough. But in any event, as I said, Scott, we have a mailbag episode to get to. So thank you all for submitting your questions. And again, we'll say it every week. Just keep sending them. Keep emailing us at theskatepod@weei.com. Reach out to us individually on Twitter or at the skatepod on Twitter and comment on YouTube. And we see everything. Bridget usually collects the YouTube comments, but again, appreciate your feedback and let's get right into it. So Scott, early on, there was 3 or 4 people who were asking questions about the coaching. So I'm going to shout out Joe. Joe was asking about Marco Sturm. Kelly was asking about Claude Julien reunion, and I'm going to lump those in with Michael, who asked a larger question about coaching. Michael says, hey, I'll appreciate and enjoy all the episodes. For next coach, I'll be disappointed if it's Rick Tocchet, Misha Donskov, Mitch Love, or Mark Savard. Savard and Donskov because they have never been a head coach at the pro level. Tocchet because that's so uninspiring and unimaginative. I want this organization to think outside the box and get creative. I would be pleased with Todd Nelson. He has one of the best resumes in pro hockey and is a proven winner at the pro level. I also believe Ryan Mougenel should be getting serious consideration. He's done a great job in Providence, just like Bruce Cassidy did before he got the job or the top job. There's so many good head coaches at the AHL level who have had success and been promoted to the NHL and have continued that success. That's where the organization should be looking for the next head coach, not lifelong NHL assistants who have no experience as head coaches in pro hockey. Scott, how do you feel about all of that?
So I think there's some good points there. I am the point about no head coaching experience for who did he mention? Misha Donskov, Mitch Love, or Mark Savard at the pro level, totally fair. Now, that alone would not cause me to be out on those guys. I think, sometimes you have to be ahead of the curve and be willing to give someone a shot. Like those 3 guys, most likely their next job is going to be head coach in the NHL. Maybe one of them decides, hey, I'm going to go down to the AHL, be a head coach there. If they feel like it's working against them, like, maybe they go through this cycle, think they have a chance, but the feedback they get is, we really wish, you had a little bit more head coaching experience. So that's possible. There are certainly teams that think like that. Like I said, that alone wouldn't stop me on those guys. Donskov in particular, I've mentioned before, really interests me. He is, a little outside the box in terms of the way he kind of came up, where he was a director of hockey operations before he moved to Vegas's bench, was widely regarded as kind of being at the forefront of some stuff analytically. So has that as a background, which, depending on where you come from, I know can be a hot topic thing. You certainly hear quite a bit of anti-analytics talk when it comes to football and basketball in particular around these parts. Um, so like that's all fair. Joe, I think, had mentioned Marco Sturm. He would also fit, I think, what Michael is looking for, where he mentions guys who have had AHL success. Marco Sturm has also been head coach in the AHL now for 3 years. The Ontario Reign have done well, had winning seasons under him. They did have a disappointing exit in the first round this year, but that was one of those best of 3 first round series, like we talked about with Providence. Like that's, it's a real crapshoot when you're talking about you just need to win 2 games. So they were the higher seed, but did lose that series. Rick Tocchet is really the interesting one here to me, which Michael calls uninspiring and unimaginative. I have some thoughts on this, but because I'm now rambling, I'll let you pick up there, Brian.
Oh wow. Well, now I'm on the edge of my seat. What a tease that was, Scott. Yeah. Look, I think there's a lot of good options. I'm not really one to hear a head coach's name and just say, "Oh, no way," because I mean, these guys are all capable individuals. They all know the game really well. They all have resumes at high levels of hockey. So it's not. I don't like just discrediting somebody for just to I don't believe in that. I also think that at the end of the day, coaches coach and players play, and the coach matters certainly, but whoever the Bruins hire, it's gonna have to be on the players and on the leaders in that room to really dictate how things operate. It's you we've seen the bad cop in Bruce Cassidy wore thin on the players, right? I like Bruce Cassidy. I was not too pleased when the Bruins fired him when they did, coming off the heels of a 50-win season. When David Krejci was not on the team anyway, he was over in Czech Republic, and he had 6 winning seasons in Boston. Had the highest winning percentage, I think, of all active coaches in that 6-year tenure. He was the Bruins head coach, and there were certain players in the room that just weren't too thrilled with how Bruce operated or communicated, and that's on the players to that feel that way. I'm not here to criticize the players in that sense. If they felt that way, they felt that way. But I'm just here to say you had the bad cop in Bruce that wore thin in the players despite having success. And did he win the ultimate prize with Boston? No. But then he goes to Vegas and does. And then you have the ultimate good cop in Jim Montgomery. And eventually that relationship, for one reason or the other, wore thin. Maybe it was between the coach and management and friction there with contract negotiations. And maybe it kind of bled into how Jim entered the season as a bench boss for the Bruins. Maybe he wasn't his normal self. So my point is, we've seen coaches on multiple ends of the spectrum here for the Bruins have success in the regular season, but ultimately find their way out the door. So it's a long-winded way of me saying it comes down. We can hire whichever coach we want, and I'm sure they're going to have their faults and their strengths, but it really does come down for me to the players. Now, with that said, I think Rick Tocchet in particular, I think people look at him and they say, "Oh no, he's an old school guy and he's outdated and he's not what this team needs." Well, I would also say that despite not having a ton of success as a head coach at the NHL level, it's been noted that Quinn Hughes in Vancouver, who's one of the best defensemen in the world, certainly a new age player, was very, very close with Rick Tocchet, his former head coach of Vancouver, and was very upset when he got fired. So that does tell you that Rick Tocchet does resonate with younger players today, despite being an old school guy. And I do think that while analytics are important, you do have to be able to manage people. Sometimes that means knowing what motivates them, knowing when they need some tough love, knowing when they need encouragement. I think that with Misha Donskov and Marco Sturm and Mark Savard and some of those other candidates, I personally don't really know how they communicate with players. I know that they know the game analytically, but I don't know how they are personally in the personal side. Whereas Rick Tocchet I think we kind of know a little bit more his personality. So this is not me endorsing any one of these candidates over the other. At this stage, some of them are just more of a mystery to me with interpersonal communication than Rick Tocchet is on that side of it. So I'm ultimately open to any and all options. I'm not really sold on one or the other. I think they would all be good hires for different reasons, not to have a cop out answer.
Yeah, I think from all accounts, I think Todd Nelson and Marco Sturm are pretty good communicators. From everything I've heard in terms of their relationships with players. Uh, Donskov's interesting. Like what I read about him in terms of high praise is the way that he is able to communicate information to players. Like, so he's a big analytics guy, but he's not throwing analytics at players and being like, here's analytically like what we want to do. Like, you have to be able to turn that into language players are going to understand and make it easily digestible. And from what I've read, he's very good at that. Now that is different than now that's direct communication in terms of game plan, strategy, that stuff. That's not the same as people management, which is part of what you're talking about. So that is like a fair question about him in particular is, he hasn't been the head guy, so he hasn't really had to do that. Now, as it relates to Tocchet, so here's what I would say. In a vacuum, I wouldn't hate hiring Rick Tocchet. I do think he's pretty smart. I do think he's a pretty good communicator. There's stuff to like there. What worries me is these reports and speculation that he's going to end up being one of the highest paid coaches ever whenever he gets hired this cycle. And there's reports that the Flyers in particular are being really aggressive. I don't see what makes Rick Tocchet deserving of that kind of commitment. Talking like a 5-year contract, $5-6 million a year. Like, look at his track record. He's been a head coach for 9 NHL seasons. Do you know how many of those years he's made the playoffs?
2, maybe 3, 2.
Technically 2. One of them was the 2020 COVID bubble year where the Coyotes were actually in 10th place in the Western Conference and only got in because they expanded the field with the play-in tournament. It's not his track record is not very impressive. Now he wins a Jack Adams last year, so that certainly looks impressive. And it is, and like I don't want to discredit that season too much, but what I would point out is that he got a career year from Thatcher Demko, career year from Quinn Hughes, career year from JT Miller. That team had the highest shooting percentage in the NHL and one of the highest save percentages. That's generally not a formula that is easily replicated. Shooting percentages don't usually carry over from year to year, and they did not for Vancouver this season. And goalies, as we know, can be a bit fickle from year to year. I mean, Thatcher Demko goes from finishing second in the Vezina to an injury-plagued season, and Vancouver doesn't get good enough goaltending. I just worry that like the results aren't there. Now, look, were the 4 years he was in Arizona, were those great teams? No, of course not. But they weren't completely devoid of talent either. I mean, you had like Clayton Keller developing into a borderline star. You had Taylor Hall still playing good hockey, and Phil Kessel still playing good hockey. Jacob Chikrin and Oliver Ekman-Larsson on the back end. Like, generally good goaltending. Those teams, like Darcy Kemper, Antti Ranta, Aiden Hill, like all had good seasons during that stretch. And yet those teams weren't very good. It's not like there was nothing there for him to work with. You go back to Tampa. Now, I know that's a long time ago. We're talking 2008 to 2010, but they missed the playoffs 2 years in a row with him as head coach. And then the first year he leaves, they get to the Eastern Conference Finals in 2011 with mostly the same roster. So I just have questions about just how bankable he, if I'm hiring someone to be one of the highest paid coaches ever, there better be like a bankable track record there of like, yeah, this guy gets the most out of his teams. And I don't really see that with Tocchet. So again, like on a cheaper deal, would I be fine with it? Sure. But in terms of that kind of commitment, like paying him like a Mike Sullivan or a John Cooper, I don't see Tocchet being particularly close to that level, to be honest.
No, it's totally fair. It's totally fair. I think ultimately, I just wonder if you're the Bruins, and I'm trying to think. This might be a dangerous activity here, but I'm trying to think like Don Sweeney and Cam Neely because I'm trying to think of realistically where their minds are at, and I think that they're looking at.
I imagine our audience right now is like the like family is Simpsons or Family Guy where it's like the monkey like just clapping cymbals together.
Yeah, yeah. So if you're Don Sweeney and Cam Neely, you're looking at your current roster. Okay, there's two players that you brought in last offseason from Vancouver in Elias Lindholm and Nikita Zadorov, who have experience playing under Rick Tocchet. Both of them had success. Nikita Zadorov was playing some of the best hockey of his career in the NHL under Rick Tocchet. Now, is that because of Tocchet? I don't know, but it's just it's a commonality there. And Elias Lindholm kind of fit in pretty well in his role with Vancouver. So, do the Bruins look at Rick Tocchet as somebody that Elias Lindholm and Nikita Zadorov, two guys who for contractual reasons have no movement clauses, so they are under. You have to consider them part of your current core because they're not going anywhere. So, do those players have a good relationship with Rick Tocchet? Can Rick Tocchet get something out of Elias Lindholm and Nikita Zadorov that can elevate those two players and help those contracts look a little bit better? Um, that's something I'm sure the Bruins are considering with Rick Tocchet. Rick Tocchet is a prototypical bench boss where his record with teams may not be great at the NHL level, as you pointed out, Scott, and ultimately that's what speaks most. But I do think that Rick Tocchet is a guy that keeps a locker room honest and keeps them accountable. And I think that is something that the Bruins are trying to implement into their locker room, which is accountability and a style of play that is indicative of hard work and relentlessness. And I think that the Bruins are probably looking around at the coaches remaining in the playoffs right now. And you've got Paul Maurice in Florida, you've got Craig Berube in Toronto, Bruce Cassidy in Vegas, Pete DeBoer in Dallas. You know, those guys, they're kind of cut from a similar cloth and a similar cloth of Rick Tocchet, where that's a prominent presence behind the bench. And so I'm just listing these reasons as to what the Bruins could be thinking. I like the idea of Marco Sturm. I like the idea of Misha Donskov. I like I said a few minutes ago, I'm open for all of these candidates. I see the good in all of them. I think that you said something a few minutes ago that is true. When coaches go from, and this is kind of maybe what Michael was getting at as well in his question, but a not AHL coaches, I'm sorry, assistant coaches. When you're an assistant coach, you have a different relationship with the players. You are the good cop. The head coach is often the bad cop. So if Marco Sturm and Misha Donskov and other Mark Savard, guys that have been in assistant coaching roles in the NHL, obviously Marco Sturm's a head coach in the AHL, but so he's kind of had to play that bad cop role, I'm sure, down in Ontario. But it's just you have to have a different relationship with your players as the head coach. So what that looks like, I don't know. One final question for me to you, Scott, is when you talk about Rick Tocchet being paid one of the highest coaching salaries of all time, and is he worth that? I'm not here to dispute that at all. Like, I think that's totally fair. What I would ask you is, and again, I'm asking for my own clarity, but when we're talking about dishing out contracts to players, let's say UFAs, right? It could be very easy to say, don't make that guy one of the highest paid players this offseason because it affects the rest of your salary cap, building your roster. When it comes to coaches, is it anything more than just more money out of the pockets of the Jacobs? It's not really. It's not going to prevent making Rick Tocchet hypothetically the highest paid coach of all time. Hypothetically, that's not going to impact the Jacobs appetite to spend to the cap. They're still going to spend to the cap.
Yeah, It's not so much, honestly, like the money isn't even really the concern for me because you're right. Like, what do I care what the Jacobs pay their head coach? Not my money, and it shouldn't affect spending on the roster. They should still be a cap team. Uh, I'm more worried about the years. Like if he's getting like 5 years, well, let's say year 2 or 3, it's not really working out. Are you like, well, we got to at least get to year 4 because the Jacobs aren't going to let us buy out 2 years or 3 years of this contract. They might let us buy out the last year. And like now you're stuck with them for 4 years when halfway through you might be like, oh, this isn't really going the way we had hoped. So that would be my bigger concern.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I mean, we see it all the time. I mean, coaches get fired, so contracts get axed. But that the buyout element of it that you mentioned is a good point. I'm gonna just add a quick question while we're talking about the coaching staff, and that is yes or no. The Bruins have their head coach hired before the NHL draft on June 27th.
Yes, definitely before that.
Okay, so then this news will be breaking pretty soon then, because the NHL season, I'm not sure when Game 7 of the Cup Finals would be, but I would imagine maybe mid-June.
Yeah, I think it was June 20th or 21st, I think is like the last day the cup final can be.
Okay, and I bring this up because some out there are saying, well, if the Bruins were going to hire Rick Tocchet, they would have done it all. They would have done it already, right? There's nothing preventing them from hiring him. Whereas Amisha Donskov or Mark Savard, guys who are still coaching in the NHL playoffs, who could theoretically be coaching behind the bench of Dallas and Toronto, respectively, until June, right? So, like those guys, you won't be able the chance to hire until then. So, but and maybe they would want to talk to those guys before hiring a Rick Tocchet. You know what I mean? So I'm not really sure how it works with the ability to talk to coaches while they're still under contract and in their active playoff season. I don't really know, but maybe you do. But
yeah, I don't think you can unless you get permission from the team. Like maybe if they have uh like if one of them were to wrap up a series early and had a gap before the start of the next series, maybe the team would allow them to interview or something. But um, yeah, usually you got to wait till the season's over. And one last thing I'll add, just for the record, is I don't think it's going to be Savard. Could be wrong. Again, he's not even available yet, so maybe there's more interest than um, maybe they'll have more interest than I expect, but I would be a little bit surprised if it's Savard. Sturm, I think, very much is a real candidate.
yeah, for me, it's realistically, I've always looked at Tocchet, Sturm, and Donskov. I mean, Marco Sturm has the obvious tie to Boston when he was playing here. At this point, a little over 15 years ago, and then goes to Germany international hockey, coaches in LA as an assistant for 4 years, has been in Ontario Reign in the AHL as their head coach. Donskov has the relationship clearly with Don Sweeney, who hired him as a bench staff assistant coach for the Four Nations tournament for Team Canada. And so that's something I absolutely read into. And of course, Rick Tocchet has ties to Boston and knows Cam for decades and Don at this point going back. So those are the three that I would be surprised if one of those guys is the next head coach of the Boston Bruins.
I think that's fair. I do still wonder like if there's going to be maybe one surprise candidate somewhere, but those feel like the front runners.
Yeah. I mean, we could always be surprised. Okay, so Scott, let's move from the Boston Bruins just for a second to the Providence Bruins because their season came to an end this past week down in Charlotte, and Kim asked a question regarding Fabian Lysell and his usage in the playoffs and his performance. Wanted to hear your thoughts on Lysell getting scratched for Game 4 against the Checkers. That can't be a good sign for the future if they're scratching him for a pivotal game in the playoffs. Also, wanted to say that was an amazing pass from Patra in the middle of all those guys to Wallstrom for the tying goal in that game. I do wish ESPN Plus carried the games, though, instead of Flow Hockey. Sorry, Chris. Last episode.
I'm gonna say get Chris off and immediately dump on him. Now, I so I subscribed to Flow Hockey this year for the first time, and I think there's like just enough to keep me interested. But I do wish there's kind of like one hub where it's just like all lower level hockey, whether that was Flow Hockey or ESPN Plus. I know the CHL playoffs right now are on Victory Plus, and by the way, are free streaming there. So if you want to watch Caleb Denwye in the QMJHL, or Gavin McKenna in the WHL final. But yeah, on the Providence Bruins, yeah, I mean, look, Fabian Lysell got scratched in Game 4. By all accounts, healthy scratch. He had not been playing well. I thought he had, quite frankly, really been struggling. So that stinks. Like, that wasn't what you wanted to see, right? He kind of has that late upswing in Boston the last few games, handful of games of the NHL regular season. And you're hoping, okay, now go down to Providence, have a great playoffs, and really have something to build off going into the summer. And didn't really happen. And quite the opposite. He had a really disappointing finish. It makes me feel like it's kind of just more of the same cycle with Lysell, which is like every time it looks like he's about to take a step forward and kind of have a chance to make a real push, he lets his foot off the gas and has a step back. On the flip side of that, I was really encouraged with Matt Potter's play. Whose question was this again? Sorry, I clicked out of the document briefly.
Kim.
Yeah. So that pass that he highlighted was a really good one. I thought he was on the puck and creating chances in general. So that's encouraging. Like, he's been good in Providence for the most part. There's been some down games and down moments here and there, but I think it's been a good developmental season for him. I see enough there to be encouraged by Podger's play heading into the summer and heading into next season. Like, obviously there's going to be spots up for grabs, and I'm not going to sit here and call him a lock to make next year's roster, but I think he has, unlike Lysell, I think he has positive momentum going into the offseason, and hopefully we see him build off that.
Yeah, and I believe it was Michael's question who floated out Ryan Mougenel as somebody who he would like to see as the Bruins' next head coach. The reason that Mougenel is somebody that just doesn't come to my mind as who that next head coach will be for Boston is based on Don Sweeney's comments to Bridget's question, which was that they would prefer the next head coach to have some form of NHL exposure. Now, I take that as meaning, at bare minimum, assistant coach at the NHL level. Maybe they mean video coach. I don't really know technically, but Ryan Mougenel, if the threshold is at least assistant coach in the NHL, Mougenel does not fit that bill. However, if Mougenel were to get the job, doesn't seem to bode too well for Fabian Lysell's future in Boston, because it's been pretty apparent for a while now, and we can put the blame on the player here. I'm not saying it's Mougenel's fault, but Mougenel and Lysell clearly haven't had a great match. They're not a match made in heaven. Mougenel has been pretty critical of Lysell publicly at times. He's applauded him at times as well publicly, but you shouldn't be getting scratched in the AHL playoffs when you were drafted 4 years ago. It's not a good look. It shouldn't happen at all. You can struggle in the playoffs, and that's one thing, but for your coach to scratch you, even if Mougenel just has some vendetta against Lysell, just doesn't like him. Sometimes, I'm not saying it's the case, but sometimes coaches just don't like certain players, and players don't like coach. It happens. I'm not saying that's what's happening here. I doubt it. But clearly, Lysell doesn't take much to get in the doghouse with Mougenel. And at this stage in his career, to be honest, it's unacceptable. Now, I thought he looked pretty good in his last couple of games in Boston, but Mougenel's watching him every day. The Bruins are watching him every day. And him getting scratched in the playoffs, again, 4 years after being drafted, almost to the month, that's not good enough. And I don't really know how that could be defensible by Fabian, but I guess we'll see. He's going to have a pretty damn good camp in September if he's going to go from playoff scratch in the AHL to making the Boston Bruins in the fall next year. So we saw his camp last year. It wasn't great. Okay. It's now or never for him. It feels like this coming spring, this coming fall.
Yeah, and I don't think it is any sort of vendetta. I think it's tough love from someone who, from what I can tell, I think Ryan Mougenel likes Fabian Lysell personally and just really wants him to succeed and really wants him to, quote unquote, get it. And yeah, we'll resort to criticism or benching when he feels the situation calls for it. I also think Fabian Lysell likes Ryan Mujanel and respects him. Like when we talked, when Lysell in training camp kind of had a couple tough preseason games and needed almost to like reset mid camp, he said it was Ryan Mujanel that he talked to who kind of helped like calm him down. This season, I think it was fairly recent. Like I think it was his most recent call up. Said he talked to Mujanel about like what he needs to do at the NHL level. So I also think there is now maybe a playoff scratch changes that. I don't know. I haven't talked to Fabian Lysell or Ryan Mujanel since that happened. But I think in the past, I think Lysell has respected Mujanel and taken to his coaching and his teaching, and kind of takes his words to heart. So yeah, it's not ideal, and like you said, I think unacceptable is a fair characterization. Like it shouldn't be happening.
Yeah, I just feel like at that point you're a 4-year pro or 3.5-year pro, whatever, 3-year pro, and because he did go back to Vancouver in the WHL after his draft. But I mean, at this point, like he should have a relationship with Mujanel again, especially if they do, get along and like each other. That should be a conversation in the coach's office, Fabian. And you have that conversation. It shouldn't get to scratch territory. If you really have, I understand tough love, I do. But when you're talking about a player that has some of the most skill and speed on the Providence Bruins roster, and you do need offense to win us and come from behind in a series. Obviously, that game he was scratched. The Providence Bruins won it, right? So I mean, it didn't hurt them in that game. But you would just think that one of your most talented players that you do have a good relationship with, that should just be a conversation in the coach's room. And that's a man-to-man conversation. Fabian, you're not a kid anymore. Now, I'm giving like you better wake up, or scratch territory. It's just that's a bit extreme. That to me, that kind of gives me. I would love to say that that's Mujanel showing tough love and thinking Fabian will grow from this. To me, that's Mujanel being kind of fed up with the player and being willing to go down and end your season with him out of the lineup if they lost that game. To me, it speaks a little bit more than just some tough love. It could just be he might just be I don't know. I'm
Yeah,
not in that room.
Or feeling like he had genuinely been a net negative, and with the season on the line, the team was better off with him out of the lineup. No matter what, it's not good.
It's not good. Yeah. I mean, again, and I'm not watching, hand up. I'm not watching all these Providence Bruins games. I'm watching some of the highlights online because honestly, I would watch these AHL games if, to Kim's point, it was more readily available. I mean, I'm not gonna just download a paid subscription to watch a couple of AHL playoff games. I'm just not doing it. So I wish it was more readily available, but it's not. So I'm not watching these games intimately, and I'm certainly not, covering the team down in Providence. But that whole situation has always just kind of seemed Jekyll and Hyde. Okay, Scott, moving along here to Duncan. Duncan asks, is the organizational need for a 1C so big that it's worth exploring trading up into the top 5? What would a trade like that possibly look like? Is it worth sacrificing the draft capital the Bees gained this March? I'll let you go first, Scott, here.
To me, not unless you're getting to the top 2 and getting Michael Misa. If you can do that, I'm going to be pretty open to giving up a lot to get there. I don't see one of those top 2 picks getting traded because it is, there is a drop off after the top 2. So I don't see either the Islanders or San Jose second, right? Yeah. I don't see either one of them being willing to drop down to 7. I think that they're just going to want the best player available, and they know that Misa and Schaefer are kind of a cut above in this class. And I don't know what you have that would really blow them away anyways. So after that, like, could there be movement in the top 5 where maybe you can go from 7 to 4 or something? Like, maybe, but I don't know that that's worth it. Like, whatever you would have to give to jump up for a James Hagens, say that was your target. As much as I like Hagens, like, am I convinced that he is just far and away head and shoulders above, say, a Jake O'Brien who might be there at 7? I'm really not. Like there's a divide there in my mind. Those two are on different tiers, but there's not so much of a divide that like I'm throwing in an extra first or second round pick or a Matt Potch or a Mason Lohrei to move up. Like I'll just stick at 7 and take the best player that's left, and hope I hit it out of the park, which isn't like the most encouraging. I know fans would love to have some better answer and more surefire prospect than that. But even if you move up to 4, like I don't know if you're getting that. So unless there's a way to get to the top 2, I'm not really interested.
Yeah, and honestly, this draft, it just even Misa and Schaefer. If I was drafting 1 or 2, would I take one of those guys? Yes. Like I would draft one of those 2, whichever was available. And if I was drafting first and it was the Bruins, I would take Misa. I've been on record saying that. So I'm not saying I wouldn't take those guys first and that they aren't deserved 1 and 2 picks. But what I would say is, to me, this draft all along has just felt like a complete uncertainty. Not even the top 2 picks. I wouldn't. Would you be surprised, Scott, if Misa or Schaefer, if neither one of them ended up being the best player in this draft in 5-10 years? Like, would you be that surprised?
No, not really. Like if I had to bet, obviously, yeah, I'd bet on them.
Sure,
But
yeah. You
no,
go.
I definitely would not be surprised.
Yeah, you go with the probabilities. You go with the projections, right? But because that's all we can go off at this point in time. But as far as trading up, it's this draft to me because yeah, what are you giving up to get there, right? And the 2017 draft comes to my mind, and Chris talked about this on the last episode. But the 2017 draft, okay, the rankings were the top 2. Here were the North American rankings: Nolan Patrick, number 1; Nico Hischier, ranking number 2; Casey Middlestat was 3; Gabe Velarde was 4; Michael Rasmussen was 5; Cody Glass was 6; Owen Tippett was 7; Eli Tolvanen was not 8; Cale Makar was 9; Nick Suzuki was 10. Like Miro Heiskanen was in that draft. I mean, just so after Nolan Patrick, so Nico Hischier gets drafted first overall. Then Nolan Patrick gets drafted second overall. Now, look, Nolan Patrick, he was a promising player. He dealt with concussion issues and migraine issues. He had to retire at 25 years old. Unfinished product, and was battling the entire time to stay healthy up until he was 25. So that's an unfortunate circumstance for Nolan Patrick. It's kind of unfair to look back at his skill or physique because his mind and his concussions didn't allow him to keep playing. But Hischier and Nolan Patrick go first and second. After them, Miro Heiskanen was drafted. Cale Makar was drafted. Elias Pettersson was drafted. Martin Necas was drafted. Nick Suzuki was drafted. Robert Thomas was drafted at 20. Josh Norris at 19. I mean, clearly, Scott, this was a very deep draft, right? Deeper on paper than in hindsight than this draft class, right? But my point is, if people knew that the last 8 or 10 names were going to be who they ended up being, they wouldn't have probably drafted Nolan Patrick or Nico Hischier first and second. And this draft right now kind of gives me similar vibes. Not so much it's going to end up being as deep as that draft, but in the sense that Misa and Schaefer are going to go 1 and 2, but I'm not positive they're going to be the best players at the end of the day. Like, I'm just not. And some drafts you do know. Some drafts you have Austin Matthews and Connor McDavid and Nathan McKinnon and Sidney Crosby and that Macklin Celebrini, Connor Bedard. Those guys are going to end up being the best players in their draft class. This is not one of those drafts, and so I'm trepidatious to try to trade up and risk further draft capital for what is, in my mind, just an uncertainty.
Yeah, that like 2017 is a good comparison because you're right. Like that ends up looking like a really good draft in terms of the number of players that hit, but it's spread out and there's misses in there, both at the top and then even like Cody Glass going 6, Elias Anderson going 7. Middlestat at 8 is good, not great. Rasmussen at 9, like he's a fourth liner. And then like after that, you have Nachos 12, Suzuki 13. Obviously, those guys would have been much higher, if you redid it. That's also the same draft where the Bruins take Earl Vakanainen at 18, which was not considered a reach at all. But Robert Thomas goes two picks later, and is now like a clear number one center. Top 10 center, maybe top 12 in the NHL.
Josh Norris went the pick after Vakanainen.
Yeah, I'm kind of less of a fan of Josh Norris, but still a good player. And obviously
good player.
better than Vakanainen.
Yeah.
But yeah, like again, it's easy to do in retrospect where you're like, well, yeah, obviously if everyone knew Robert Thomas was going to be a legit number one center, forget the Bruins not passing on him at 18. There's 10, 11 other teams above them that wouldn't have passed on him. So yeah, it's in most drafts it's a total crapshoot, but especially these years where there's this uncertainty going into it, like
right.
Yeah, there's going to be really good players. Even though we're calling this a weaker class, there's going to be really good players to be had in this first round. 5 years from now, we're going to be talking about someone as a legit number one center on a good team. But it could very well be the fifth center off the board. It could be who you draft. Or you could miss, and it could be the team right after you get some.
Right.
Like and obviously, look, we're all going to play the game, and we'll rip the Bruins if they ultimately get it wrong. But just know, like, this is like industry wide that people consider this a really unstable, uncertain type of draft.
Yeah, and again, this is not to criticize like teams that didn't take Makar first over, like,
right. If everyone knew Kel McCarr was going to be Kel McCarr, he's going number one, like, obviously.
But that's exactly my point. Is at the time it was consensus: Nolan Patrick and Nico Hischier, number one and number two, like, because people thought they would be the best two players out of this draft. And then you go on, and there's about, I would say, maybe seven NHL stars, maybe close to 10, drafted after them in that first round. It's like, okay, well, if draft prospects and rankings were so consensus and so you wouldn't have drafts like that where, and look, Nico Hischier is an NHL captain, very good two-way player. I think the Devils got a really good player there, but they didn't get the best player in the draft. I don't even know if you were to redraft that class now, knowing what we know. I mean, Hischier is probably a top 5 pick, but maybe 5. So it's maybe 4.
Yeah, like Makar and Heiskanen are going over him.
Yeah.
After that, like, I think you have an argument. Like, it's probably him, Nachos, Suzuki, Elias Pettersson. Like, throw those all kind of right in the same group-ish.
Nachos has been a late bloomer, right? I mean, this draft was almost 10 years ago, and only now are we talking about how Marty Nachos would have been a better pick in hindsight. Well, Nico Hischier has been doing what he's been doing now since the year after he was drafted. So, yeah. But anyway, long-winded way of discussing this draft, and I just don't know if this draft is worth moving up, because I don't know if we could sit here and say, because of the rankings, that Michael Misa is going to be better than Jake O'Brien, and he very well may be, but it's not as much of a guarantee as certain draft classes. All right, Scott, let's go to Roger. Roger says, since the Bruins slid back to number 7 in the upcoming draft, I'm wondering who in the Bruins organization handles player development. Is it Ryan Bujanel and Adam McQuaid? Do amateur scouts also get involved in development?
Yeah, so Adam McQuaid is in charge. He's assistant general manager, player development. That was a title formerly held by Jamie Langenbrunner, who now has, I forgot to pull it up, but has a slightly different title. I believe is still involved in player development, but Adam McQuaid has been elevated to kind of the lead guy there. Yeah, obviously Ryan Bujanel, as head coach in Providence, has a big hand in those players there. Mike Dunham is in charge of goalie development. Obviously, Bob Essenza does some of that as well. but Mike Dunham is really more hands-on with the younger goalies, whereas goalie Bob is obviously with the NHL team every day throughout the season. And then there's also like their skating and skills coaches. John McClain is sort of the top guy in Boston. So they work really closely at like rookie camp, development camp over the summer. But McQuaid's the big one because he's going out throughout the season and checking in with these prospects, whether they're in college or, he'll go to Canadian juniors. He even makes some trips over to Europe. Scouts don't really get involved as much. They might be in, like, if they happen to be there at the same time as a prospect, they might be in touch with them, but they're not really getting hands-on in terms of development as much. So yeah, those are big, and obviously Don Sweeney at the top oversees all of it as the general manager, even if he's not really working hands-on with guys. And then there's wherever they're playing, there's those coaches, and you rely on, if a kid's at BC, you're relying on Greg Brown to be a good coach and help their development, and that's part of it as well, is making sure you have your prospects in good situations where you're comfortable with how they're being used, how they're developing. And if you're not, that might be when you intervene and say, give them a little tap on the shoulder, say, hey, might be worth transferring to a different school or going to a different league, if they're not happy with how you're developing at a certain location.
All right, Scott, I think we have maybe time for 2 or 3 more. Let's get to this one. This is an interesting question. I've never really thought of this before. Tracy asks, maybe there's a glaringly obvious answer to this, but in terms of coaching searches, which we were talking about earlier, why do we never see coaches coming over from Europe? I understand there could be a language barrier, but there must be some that speak English, or do none of them speak English? Just curious why it never seems to be an avenue anyone explores. I'll go first here, Scott, and I'm curious to hear what you think, because it is a fascinating question. Off the top of my head, I think there's a few things that come to mind. Number one, I do think that it's a much more drastic life move to move your family from Europe to North America. Number one. Number two, I think it's a different game that's being coached over there. Yes, it's hockey, and of course, but there's certain leagues with different ice sizes. I just think the game is just coached differently strategically. It's a different style of play. I think there's definitely a lack of networking, right? You see a lot of hires in North America because this assistant general manager, worked with this guy 5 years ago at this college, and then he's been tracking him ever since, and he's talks to him, to his GM, or just whatever. Like there's so much networking that goes along with professional hockey and just hockey in North America in general, whether it's through NCAA, CHL, AHL, all the way up to the NHL. There's just a ton of networking, and everybody knows everybody. Those 3 things I would say are the biggest reasons why maybe you don't really hear it much. Obviously, there's time differences. So, I mean, if somebody wants to talk to somebody, they'll talk to somebody. But, Europe is obviously like 6, 7, 8 hours ahead of us. So it's just logistically difficult. And I just think there's a lack of networking. And those are the first things that come to my mind. But Scott, maybe there's some blanks that you can fill in and other reasons.
No, I think that networking and familiarity is a big one. Like when I saw this question, like I texted a couple people, not with the Bruins or anything, but just because I never even really thought about it. So just to see like what other people thought. And that was one of the responses, was like, basically people just aren't as familiar with those coaches and don't know them as well, don't have as much feedback to go on, where, if a guy's been an NHL head coach before, or is in the AHL, or has been an assistant in the NHL, you have a ton of background on them. Like, people know their character, people know how they deal with players, they've been around the game, around your game in North America. And I think there's like this sense that hiring a European coach would kind of like a GM would kind of be going out on a limb and making themselves vulnerable because if you're there's only been a couple European coaches in NHL history, and I believe the ones that there have been had some, to use Don Sweeney's word, exposure to the NHL in the sense that like they had been either a coach in minors or juniors or been an NHL assistant. Um, so I think there's a feeling that like if you were the GM that took a chance on some hotshot SHL coach from Sweden and he comes over and it's just a disaster, like you're getting fired. You went out on a limb, you tried something new, and it blew up in your face. Whereas if you hire, known commodity X, even if it doesn't work, like everyone gets your thinking, like Cam Neely and Charlie Jacobs aren't over your shoulder being like, all right, Don, why the hell did you do that? Like, look what happened. No, if you hire Rick Tocchet, Cam Neely and Charlie Jacobs know why you hired him. And even if it doesn't work, like they're gonna understand the thought process. And that's not like I would love to see someone be bold enough to take that chance and try something new. I'm usually I usually lean more towards the get creative route than the quote unquote retreads. But there's a reason that coaches get so many opportunities, and it is because they're known commodities and people know them and are just more comfortable doing it um, than going overseas for someone who doesn't really have any experience or connection to NHL teams.
All right. Justin asks, this is a fun question. If you need a big three in quotes to win an NBA championship, what is the NHL equivalent? Is it more like a big four or a big five? What's the number for you? And what are your picks? So he also says a goalie with top three numbers in the postseason seems a given. I mean, look, Scott, I think strong goalie play is obvious. I think we've seen enough examples throughout the league's history where sometimes it's a top goalie in the league that comes through, right? I mean, think back to, I mean, the entire '90s and 2000s was dominated by Patrick Roy and Martin Brodeur and just Dominic Hasek and Chris Osgood. I mean, there was so many elite goalies that were having success in the latest stages of the spring. More recently, Sergei Bobrovsky, Andrei Vasilevsky, for sure. But there's also a lot of examples of goaltenders who won a Stanley Cup where they were playing the best hockey when it mattered most, but wouldn't be considered the best goalie in the league. So goaltending is important, obviously. Who that goalie is, sometimes it varies. Whereas, you're not really seeing the 30th best number one center in the NHL usually winning a cup. Usually with the position players outside of the goal, you do need those players. So, with hockey, not to be cliche, but it really is just hockey and football, just the ultimate team sport. You need everybody to pull on the rope, and ultimately, you're not winning a Stanley Cup if you don't have the depth and the complementary pieces to surround what would be your big three or four or five. So, you could have you could have the best center in the world and the best defenseman in the world, but if you don't have the pieces around them, you're not going to win a Stanley Cup. With that in mind, Scott, I think we all know depth is important to win a cup. For me, I think your top defenseman needs to be probably a top 10 defenseman in the world at that time. I think history would probably say that every cup winner, their number one defenseman is probably a top 10 demon in the world at that time. I think so you have to have a true number one D-man, a true number one center, which I would probably expand that to maybe at least having a top half of the league number one center at that time. And so that those two positions in goaltending, but then it's like you also need everything. I mean, you also need the scoring wingers, and you need the number two defenseman, and you need the depth pairs, and like you need what happens when top lines cancel each other out? Who has the best third line, right? So it's like it takes an army. But if you were to boil it down, Scott, to a big 3 or 4 or 5, what would you say, and how good at those positions do those players have to be league wide?
Yeah, so in my head, when I started answering this, I basically came up with big four, and with a lot of the same line of thinking that you just laid out. And to me, that'd be legit number one center. I think you're right to say like at least top 15 in the NHL. Uh, a legit scoring wing, like top line scoring wing, star or close to it. Um, I'm thinking like I would say this person probably has to be top 15 to 20 in the NHL in points, roughly. Legit number one defenseman is the third piece for all the reasons you said. Like, even if they're not one of the top scorers among D, they got to be one of the top two-way guys. So, yeah, top 10 to 12 in the league. And a legit number one goalie, who you can count on to be uh, above average and win you some games, step up and steal some games. So that comes out to a big four for me. And then I also revisited because I knew they've done this exercise. The Athletic every year late in the season, uh, the Dom Lucian who does this, it calls it the Stanley Cup checklist, and basically goes through the last 15 teams, last 15 Stanley Cup winners, and identifies like basically what are the through lines that all these teams have, or at least the overwhelming majority of them have. And so he's tweaked the formula a couple times over the years, but what he settled on for this year in terms of, so he kind of breaks it down into like elite core, support core, depth core. And the elite core, basically the positions he settled on, were franchise forward, which doesn't differentiate in terms of position, but franchise forward, which is like one of the very top elite guys in the league. Star forward, which is like just a level below that. Franchise defenseman, which we talked about. Star goalie. And then interestingly, shutdown forward is something that like basically every cup winner has had. So Selke trophy candidate type of player. That might be the same as like your franchise or star forward, or it might be a third line center who can handle tough matchups. So I found that interesting that got thrown in there. And then like support core, he had, another scoring forward, an offensive defenseman, a shutdown defenseman, and like a support forward. So that's getting a little deeper. Obviously, I don't think you need, big 10 or 11. But I did think the inclusion of shutdown forward there was interesting as something that you might not think off the top of your head is something you need to win a Stanley Cup, but has been a part of basically every recent cup winner.
Yep. No, it's a fun question, and unfortunately for the Bruins, if we're looking at the Bruins right now, you got your franchise forward, you got David Pastrnak. After that, you don't have a star forward. You have, was it star defenseman or franchise defenseman?
Franchise defenseman. I would say McAvoy qualified. If he's on his game, if he comes back strong next year, he qualifies.
I agree. No, that so you got your franchise forward, you got your franchise defenseman. Star goalie is anything but a certainty after this past season, let's be honest. And then star forward, they don't have that right now. So maybe they can acquire that this summer, and that'll get us to Scott's question, which this might be probably the last one we get to because we're getting close to an hour here. Scott says Scott B, so not Scott M for those listening, wondering if maybe somebody submitted a question to themselves. But we have Scott B, who says, I listened to the end of year press conference and heard retool, not rebuild, but think it will take at least 2 years at best to have a squad that is ready for top level NHL competition. I think it would be best if they went after Mitch Marner, but it is likely they will not have the cash to get him at 14 million. So I'll just stop this real quick right there. I do think they'll have the money to spend on Mitch Marner if they want to, and I think it'll be more like 13 million. But let's just keep going here. With that in mind, the Bruins lost a lot of character and veteran leadership last March, and think they need to get some character leadership free agents into the mix to get the black and gold headed in the right direction, while the youth movement, Minton, Patra, Lysell, Husnudinov, get used to NHL speed and expectations. What free agents do you think would bring best leadership to the team? I'd like to hear your thoughts on Matt Duchene, Brock Besser, along with Marner. So, Scott, why don't you take this one to start?
So I don't love the names mentioned there in terms of bringing leadership. I don't really think Matt Duchene has that kind of reputation. Now he's been a very productive veteran for the Dallas Stars. And I think he actually did wear an A with Tyler Seguin out this year, or at least rotated through it. But he doesn't have a reputation as a great leader. I'll just say that when he left Colorado, there were kind of rumors and reports that he wasn't especially loved in that locker room. Now he's grown up since then. Maybe he's much more mature and actually could be a leader now. I don't know, but that's not really where I would turn. Brock Besser, as far as I know, I don't really think he's been much of a leader or has had to assume that responsibility. I would look more at, at the top of the market. I mean, John Tavares has been a captain for 2 franchises. I don't know if he's going to be available, and I don't know that he makes a ton of sense for the Bruins to spend big on, even if he is. Brock Nelson wore a letter with the Islanders, veteran. I think brings some of that. Claude Giroux could be a free agent if Ottawa doesn't re-sign him before he gets to the market. Bruins were interested in Giroux before. They, from what I understand, were actually very close to having a deal done that he nixed in order to go to the Florida Panthers at the trade deadline, whenever that was. Was that the 22 season? Jamie Benn's been a captain in Dallas. That's been a successful team. Maybe you'd look there. And of course, like, we have to mention Brad Marchand, who was mentioned in the question, but he's going to be out there. Again, I think that the door's not closed, but I think that Band-Aid has been ripped off, and I don't see it. But if that's what you're looking for is veteran leadership, along with a good player, like, there's not many who are going to be available this summer who kind of check that box more than Marchand would.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it, Scott. I mean, I mean, Jamie Benn is projected 2 years at 4.8 million. He's 35 years old. He's honestly he's been productive in Dallas. I mean, he's very much part of what in my opinion could be the Stanley Cup favorite team right now, over in Dallas. So is he the top player? No, but he wouldn't be the top player in Boston either. Maybe he stays in Dallas, but a lot of people turn their nose up at the notion of Jamie Benn, and I listen. If you don't like the player, that's fine. And I think a lot of people would say, why not just bring back Marchand? I think Marchand at that point, what would he be making? He's projected right now. He's projected 5.1. This is according to AFP Analytics, who project all the UFA and RFA contracts and what they'll sign for. So right now, Marchand, who's 36, is projected 2 years at 5.1. Jamie Benn is projected 2 years at 4.8. So,
by the way, like, that's really interesting projection for Marchand, because that is much lower than he wants. And by the way, he may this postseason very well be playing himself into closer to what he wants, which is like 7+.
Yeah. Now, for those that are saying Marchand would still be more productive than Jamie Benn from an offensive standpoint, I don't disagree with that. I do think that there's something to be said about once somebody's left the door, there are some feelings and emotions that might be tough to overcome. Jamie Benn, I do think would bring an element of physicality and toughness, physical intimidation that maybe Martian doesn't have. But you mentioned those two guys. Some other players. I mean, you mentioned Claude Giroux as well. Some other players, worth mentioning. Not for nothing, but I know he's 40 years old, and I'm not saying I would do this, but if we're talking about leadership, Brent Burns is a pending UFA. Again, he's 40 years old, and right now AFP Analytics is projecting him to sign a 1-year deal at 5.3 million. It's probably too rich for anybody's liking here, but he's a right shot defenseman that Boston has a need for at the moment, and would provide the leadership. So this is catered towards the leadership element of the question. Yanni Gourde is, probably a bit redundant as a depth center, but he's available. Who, is definitely a leadership type guy. I just don't know. I think Boston first and foremost is they're probably gonna try to get that impact star. They're gonna try to get Mitch Marner. I don't know if it's gonna work out for them if they're gonna sign him, but I think they're looking at him and they'll see what money they have after that to, fill out the rest of the roster. But yeah, there's some options. But again, when you have to save pennies for Mitch Marner or an impact player, which I think Boston's going to try to do based on all their commentary about how they want to get back. Well, how are you going to get right back? Not just by McAvoy and Lindholm being healthy. Like they're going to have to replace and add from what Marchand was last year for the Bruins. So that we'll have more free agent talk as we get closer to that too.
Yeah, and I'm with you on, I know the question from Scott, from other Scott, said like he doesn't think they'll have the money. Like they will. It might just mean that's the only notable free agent signing they make. Like the rest of their offseason might be re-signing their own guys and just filling in depth. And as I've said before, I'm okay with that offseason because I think you need horses, not ponies. Like go get the top guy available and then figure out the rest and add as needed when you have opportunities, whether it's deadline or next season to fill other holes. But like you're not getting a number one center this offseason, or at least I don't think you are, unless Don Sweeney has something up his sleeve. So Mitch Marner is the star that you can get. So yeah, I would be like, even if it means I'm not signing, a top 4 right shot defenseman, and I'm not signing, a second scoring winger on top of Marner, like I'm okay with that. Get the top guy, and then we'll address other stuff later. I would rather do that than trying to fill, 2 or 3 holes with the second or third best guy available at each position.
Yeah, and I think obviously, and this is a bit of a tease because Scott, myself, and Bridget, we are gonna we do have something in store for next week, I believe, regarding roster building and a fun exercise we're gonna do. But ultimately, the Bruins have some RFAs that they have to deal with. We'll see which ones they decide to keep. I mean, if they feel like they need every penny to go after certain guys, then it might be at the expense of some RFAs not being in Boston. Because there are a couple of RFAs that there's tiers to the Bruins RFAs. There's ones that the Bruins definitely want to bring back, and there's others that are expendable, in my opinion, and probably in the opinion of many. Scott, where it gets interesting for me and for you, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. What if the Bruins make every effort and they do everything right? Marner just chooses elsewhere. There's not many horses left in free agency. Would you be inclined to just not spend on some ponies if you can't land the horse? Or would you still try to get maybe a mid-sized pony? Like, what would you do in that situation?
Yeah, I'm still looking for middle 6 wings. Like I'm probably at that point accepting that I'm not getting a star. But they need middle 6 wings as well. So I'm still looking for at least 1, maybe 2 of those. And obviously the next, after Marner, you look at Nick Ehlers, Brock Besser. I like Ehlers a little more. I have questions about Besser and his inconsistency, but if the deal made sense, I'd be open to bringing in Besser because he can score. I just don't like. Do you have AFP's projection? Didn't someone had him at like 9 million?
Yeah,
I don't know.
I think that was his mid-season projection. Right now, Besser is projected 6 times 8.5.
Yeah, so like I don't love that. Like
Ehlers is 6 8.1.
I don't really love that either. But
That's that,
I mean, like you're probably trying to get one of them. I would hope it comes in a little under that, but if there's a bidding war, it might not. You might have to go over 8 for either one of them. So, but that kind of just adds to me why I'm like, this is why I would just go for the 13 million for Martin. Like, even if it goes up to 14, I would rather have Mitch Marner at 14 million than Besser at Ehlers at 8 or 8.5.
Yeah, I mean, here's my fear with Marner is that the Bruins aren't the only team that's going to have the cap space to sign him. And if you're Mitch Marner, let's say he's out on Toronto. Like, obviously, Toronto probably doesn't. They'll have to make some decisions because Matthew Nyes is an RFA, and they're gonna sign him as they should. But Mitch Marner, let's just say he wants out of Toronto. Okay, is he going to want to go from Toronto? And this is not a shot at Boston, but is he going to want to go from a cold, northern city with a hectic and critical media market to go a little bit east to another cold city, original six city with a less critical, but for the United States, probably one of the highly critical markets in the US? Or is he going to want to go to, Utah or somewhere where you can wear sandals to the rink and not have, media up your ass every day asking about everything every time you sneeze? So that's my fear, is that Marner just might want a total change of scenery that's completely different than Toronto. And I'm not so sure that Boston's as different from Toronto, obviously, as some other options he may have. If the Bruins offer the top dollar, then that's different. But I think teams will be able to match Boston. So I'm personally, I know everyone's talking sign Marner, like he'll go to the highest bidder, but I think there's teams that will bid as much as Boston. And I don't know if he'll choose Boston. Maybe he loves the city of Boston after being here so many times. Maybe he likes the original six. Maybe he likes that hockey culture that's a little bit less daunting of a media market than Toronto. Maybe he loves the idea of being on a team with Pasternak and Mac. I don't know, but
okay. But what if they put together a video package of a bunch of Bostonians saying "Mana"?
I think that might work against the Bruins' cause. I think he might say, "All right, I'm definitely going to Utah then." And I'm just throwing out Utah's name. I don't even know if they have the cap space. I've heard that they might, but
they want big guys though. Like they want size. But yeah, you're right. Like if he gets to the open market, of course, there's going to be a lot of teams in on him for sure.
And maybe if the Bruins are that desperate, then maybe they do just maybe they do just give an astronomical offer that other teams just can't. But I don't know.
I'm also let's see what happens the rest of this Toronto Florida series, which is now tied 2-2 as we record here Tuesday afternoon. I think actually they have tonight off, right? I think they play again Wednesday. But if they choke away the 2-0 lead and lose this series, feels like they're probably more open to making some significant changes and maybe letting Marner go. If they win this series and get over that Florida hump and maybe win the next series and get to the Stanley Cup final, like now you're probably talking about them trying to do everything they can to keep the core together, right? Like why would they want to lose any of those guys or be okay with losing any of those guys? So I don't know if they do have some cap space, so I don't know if there's really any way that they can keep Marner, Tavares, and Nyes. But if this team goes on a deeper run, I imagine they'll be more inclined to do everything they can to keep all three of those guys. Whereas if they lose these next two games and bow out to Florida again, then maybe they're more open to saying, you know what, it's time for more significant changes.
Even more reason to cheer for the Florida Panthers. If the Panthers win this series, then Boston's second-round draft pick they got in return for Brad Marchand will turn into a first-round draft pick. And if you're a Brad Marchand fan, which who isn't, you get a chance to see him potentially get that much closer to winning a Stanley Cup, even though it's not with the Bruins. But hey, people threw a parade for Ray Bourque. And then obviously it could help, the implosion of Toronto, and maybe it makes Mitch Marner available, and maybe even cheaper if he doesn't have a great postseason. Like, and you may have just said that, but yeah, I mean, maybe his cost comes down a little bit because people want to see him do it in the big time. But I think I don't know if it's going to matter that much.
Yeah, I think it's been pretty good so far this postseason. And we should also mention too, since we're now brought up Florida, like I mentioned Besser and Ehlers just because I was thinking of wings, but obviously Sam Bennett's there in that next tier as well. Even though he's a center, and as we've talked about, like, you kind of have a bunch of second, third line centers already, but Bennett's having another really good postseason, helping his case again as he potentially gets to the open market. And it's just he's a difference maker, and he's a tone setter. And I think obviously the Bruins would like someone like that as well. So you do have to include his name in these discussions.
Yeah, and I don't know if the Bruins are going to be in on Sam Bennett, because if they're in on Sam Bennett, then obviously you're probably not in on Mitch Marner. But something about Casey Middlestat in Boston right now. There's something that I feel like the Bruins might try to move somebody that's on the roster still, and I think Pavel Zacha, his first year in Boston, played primarily left wing with Krejci at center and Pastrnak on the right wing. Obviously, he played center mostly in 23-24 last year. A little bit of center and wing. My point is, you can put Zacha to left wing. Elias Lindholm is a center, but you can put Zacha to left wing. And if they move Middlestat somehow, it's like it opens up an opportunity for somebody like a Bennett to come in and play that second line center, or whatever you want to call it. I'm not saying that they should do it or will do it, but I feel like there's something that's going to give. I just feel like there's a little bit of the Bruins forward group right now just feels light. They just feel light, and Matt Poitras doesn't help that. Fabian Lysell doesn't help that. Fraser Mitten, he's a bigger kid, but he's still young. He doesn't really help that right now. Something's got to give. I have a weird feeling, but like I said, if they go after Bennett, I don't think they're going after Marner. Although you would free up Middlestat's cap space theoretically, or some of it. I don't know. We're getting too deep into the weeds here. A lot of offseason to go. But
just another name I want to throw out, just because I saw there's been reports that the Minnesota Wild have been open to trading him for a while, and I saw it pop up on Twitter again this morning. But Marco Rossi, who's a restricted free agent, this was his second full season, and he had 60 points, but the Wild don't like him because he's small, and maybe there's some things he has to work on defensively. I don't know if he's going to be a legit number one center, but he did just have a 60-point season as a 23-year-old, and there's some real skill there. Again, like I can't imagine the Bruins having a lineup that would have both Rossi and Middlestat in it. So just to add on to your point, like, you're probably trading Middlestat in that scenario. But I don't. It's weird. Like, I don't really get why the Wild dislike Marco Rossi as much as they apparently do, when all he does is produce for them, and then they put him on the fourth line in the playoffs for some reason. And he still scored a couple goals for them in the first round. I don't know. I like Marco Rossi as a player. The size does worry me a little, but I'm intrigued, I would say.
9th overall pick in 2020. And that scenario would send Casey Middlestat back to the state of hockey where he's from, in Minnesota. Yeah, and again, if there's any big Casey Middlestat fans out there, I'm not saying I don't like the play or anything. There's something about that Bruins post deadline mix where obviously it was a smorgasbord of players due to the trade deadline that they had, but it's really tough. Like, if Middlestat has proper wingers around him, as opposed to I don't know who I don't even know who they called up at the time, but it would look different for him. But I think he was playing with Cole Koepke a lot, and Koepke he's a UFA. He's gonna probably go somewhere else.
His most common linemen were Koepke and Vinny Lettieri.
Yeah, so that's not really a fair sample size to judge Middlestat. I'm more so coming at it because I just feel like the Bruins, we know they have their number 7 overall pick. We know there's a couple guys in free agency that they're going to try to at least, pry away from other people, and they're going to bank on health. But something just still seems like there's a shoe to drop, and it's tough to put a finger on it. But because of his lack of history with the club, because he's still young, he's got no trade protection or limited trade protection. Like, something about Middlestat just seems like I wouldn't be surprised if the Bruins moved on from him to try to better the roster elsewhere or open up an opportunity. And I don't know. So I feel like somebody on the roster right now is going to get traded at some point. Certain guys have trade protection, so it can't be them. And it's like, okay, so is it going to be Zacha or Middlestat? Because again, they have modified no moves. They have pretty good, like, Zaka's got a pretty good contract. Like, he has an 18 no trade list, and I think he's making like 4.5 or 4.2 or something like that. I'm not saying to trade Pavel Zacha, but as far as being able to move his contract, that's one that I'm sure teams would be enticed by. So, and Middlestat's not too different. I don't know, something to follow, something to keep in the back of your mind. Anyway, Scott, I think that probably wraps it up. Thank you all very much for submitting your mailbag questions. Keep them coming. Skatepod at weei.com, on Twitter at the Skatepod, Scott McLaughlin, myself, Bridget, and of course on YouTube. So keep them coming all summer. And we look forward to, Scott, when are we talking next? Today's Tuesday.
I think we'll record and drop our regular Friday episode. I think Bridget gets back Thursday, so we'll give her a few hours to settle in before force her to record with us.
All righty. All right. Well, Scott, thank you all very much for listening, and we'll talk to you on Friday. Hey guys, thanks for watching the Skate Podcast. If you want to see more of our videos, visit our playlist.
Not in front of a screen? You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Don't forget to follow us on social media, and if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment.